There we go. And one sad note, we were normally scheduled to have 3 shorts. Kelly Diamond has sent her regrets and had to drop out for these shorts. So we now only have 2 shorts. And other than that, let me introduce our first speaker. So we have Ethan Marek from the University of Pittsburgh at Greensburg. And Ethan is here to present I and Thou, Diversity Through the Lenses of Perception. So without further ado, Ethan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that very kind introduction. And I want to say thank you all for joining us this afternoon and being here. So appreciate your time and attendance. I'm just going to share my screen quickly here. And should be showing my PowerPoint. Is that correct? Okay, thank you. So yes, I and Thou, Diversity Through the Lenses of Perception. Just jump right ahead. There's my little happy starter slide there. But I and Thou, what is that? I and Thou is a book that was written by Martin Buber. Martin Buber is an Austrian-German philosopher. He was born in 1878 and lived to around 1965. And his book, I and Thou, was originally published around 1922 and in German. According to the Library of Congress subject classification system, it's B, under the B subject heading, it's a philosophy work. And some of the Library of Congress subject headings that apply to this particular book are life, and the one that I particularly stuck out to me is relationism. And Buber, in his work I and Thou, talks about relationships between people and how we view others. The book has 2 translations. There's an original translation from 1958, which is very difficult to read. And after Buber's death in 1965, his son approached a professor at Princeton by the name of Walter Kaufman to do a better translation of the book. And Walter Kaufman was also able to add notes from Buber's own private study collection to help explain the book a little bit better and some of his concepts. So what do we mean by this idea of I and Thou exactly? Well, Buber's ideas of I and Thou really relate to diversity a great deal, because if we take into consideration Buber's time period at which he was alive, there's a lot going on in terms of, America, the world after World War I, before World War II. There's a great deal of anti-Semitism in Europe at the time, leading up until World War II, and so there was this great sense of of people being the other or not included into the group of the whole. So Buber's ideas relate to diversity, equity, and inclusion because they have to do with how we see each other. The nexus of Buber's argument was that there are 2 ways that we can see each other and see other people that we're interacting with. The first way of seeing this, he terms I and you. In this situation, I is defined as oneself. It's simple enough. I is the self. And you is defined as not the I. And in this case, it is defined as the other, or not the I, or something different, or completely not of the same. However, in the second way of looking at the relationships that Buber describes, there's the I and Thou relationship and way of seeing things. In that situation, the I remains the same as the self. However, the Thou then becomes another I. It is recognized that the Thou is another I, just as oneself. And it is not the other, it's not something different, it is another I, just like we are. And this is so important to be able to see another human and other people as an I, like ourselves, because if we can get people to see each other as I's instead of you's, we can begin to break down the barriers of perceived difference and the lack of tolerance that stems from not seeing each other people as an I. So if folks can see each other as an I, we can break down those barriers of like, oh, you're different, in some way, and I, not, break down those barriers to diversity and so forth. In seeing each other as I, thou, as opposed to the I, you, it recognizes the universality of the human condition, where all people are I's, and people don't choose which I they are. We don't get to choose the I that we are, although we all are all I's. We are naturally diverse through human diversity. And so by breaking down the barrier to thou, we can begin to see each other more as I's and help other people see each other as I's and spread the notion of equality and diversity, equity and inclusion to a larger audience. Buber's ideas then have implications for diversity, equity, inclusion, and libraries. Particularly, it's so very important that we see that we recognize that all people are I's, just as we are, and that we need to see everyone as a fellow I. This is both in our personal lives and particularly like within libraries, for we get such a diverse spectrum of the human population. That we need to know and understand the universality of the human condition and treat others as an I and see others as an I. It is important to also realize at times that there may be folks in our library that have not yet come to the realization of the understanding of the I, thou, and they still see people as I, you. We need to realize that these folks exist and be tolerant of them, but perhaps try to use our spheres of influence to help show and shed light on the I, thou. Part of treating everyone as a fellow I includes things like using person first language, correct pronouns, and things like avoiding microaggressions. Really, when it comes right down to it, we're all I's on this island Earth. We're all trying to endeavor to survive and thrive the best as we can. It is the threads of common humanity that weave the fabric of our lives together. To move forward towards a more equitable and inclusive future, encompassing diversity, we must recognize the oneness of the human endeavor. And it is through seeing each other as a thou and a fellow I that we can work better together through our differences as a one people to advance our cause forward and help spread that diversity, equity, and inclusion notions to others. So I was a little quick there, but I had some time here if anyone had any questions. Thank you all for listening to that. I can listen to the chat. I don't see anything listed in the chat, or if anyone has anything they'd like to ask, please feel free to unmute yourself. Well, I'm not seeing too many questions in the chat. I appreciate the thank yous. And so I think I may stop sharing my screen for the moment and just say thank you once again for all of your time and attention. And I'm very grateful. Thank you. Oh, I think you're still muted.
Yes, I told everyone it's my toddler-proof double mute. So anyway, so thank you, Ethan. And let's get a little virtual round of applause for Ethan, and then we will pass the torch on to our next short presenter. All right.
Thank you all.
Okay, so our next presenter, our next short is from Joe Dienst from Duquesne University, and the presentation is Shedding Light on Research and Advocacy Opportunities for Individuals with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities. So I will now turn the floor over to Joe. Thank you, Joe, for being with us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys so much for having me. Let me share my screen really quick. Okay. There we go. Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so as Rocco introduced me, I am going to be talking about a resource that I created for Gumberg Library at Duquesne University relating to IDD, which is the abbreviated version of intellectual and developmental disabilities that, for the sake of myself and for you guys, I think I'll be using for the rest of this presentation. So just as an overview, I'm going to kind of give a brief introduction of myself and my background, kind of why I'm interested in this topic. The resource itself that I've created, which I actually, one moment, there's the link to the guide that I've created in the chat. And then why this resource is needed, who the resource is for, how I kind of went about creating this resource. And then just going to go through some of the pages of this library guide that I've created before I offer some closing remarks. Whoops. There we go. All right, so just kind of a background of myself. I am a part-time librarian at Duquesne University. I'm actually still in library school. I'm in my last semester earning my MLIS at the University of Pittsburgh. And before I was a librarian and pursuing my career in library science, I was actually working for about 1.5 years as a supports coordinator, which is a caseworker who, specifically in the state of Pennsylvania, that is the language that we use for a caseworker working with individuals with IDD. And so in my time there, I was working with a caseload of between 40 and 50 people, depending on staffing. And so I got very well acquainted with a lot of the information needs and individual lives and narratives of these people that I was working with. And I think that that kind of really impacted me and carried on into my library practice of this population being very vulnerable and having information needs that are unique, and wanting to make sure that in my practice as a librarian that we are not forgetting about these individuals. So to do that in my span of like what I have available at the university is I created a library guide outlining some research interest outline information as well as advocacy resources. So why is this resource needed? I think that with my own experiences, it's easy for me to think like, oh, it's obvious. There are a lot of people that are impacted by this, but if you're not as involved with this, you might think that this population kind of goes rather unseen. If we are limited to the eyes that we look as people who may not be impacted by a disability, we might think, oh, this isn't a very common thing. Well, it's actually 1 in 6 children, or 17% of children, are diagnosed with IDD. And spoiler alert, those children do grow up to be adults. And those people go off and interact with professionals in any field, which is health sciences, social sciences, psychology, sociology, the education realm, even in the business realm. People who are able and interested in pursuing employment, they're going to be in the workforce. And so it's not a matter of if we come into contact with individuals with IDD, it's a matter of when. And so working at a university, I think that it's really important that we're educating our staff, students, and our faculty on ways to kind of properly work with this population. And I think that in order to do that, it's important to have a basic understanding of what is IDD and how it can impact somebody's life, because it's easy to not have that awareness or to kind of be blinded by that sense of your own narrative. Kind of going back to the previous presentation of the I and thou, right? And so when we think about who this resource is for, it is a library guide from Duquesne University. So it is primarily going to be impacting our population of students, staff, and faculty. But it is a website that is accessible to anybody who has an internet connection. So it's not just student, staff, and faculty. It's also accessible to professionals who are interested in working with IDD, individuals that just come across the website, and then members of the general public, so self-advocates and just advocates, be that community members, organizations in the community, family members, and what have you. I really wanted to make sure that this was addressable for not just our like population at the school regarding research, but advocacy resources, kind of going back to my experience as a caseworker. And so my methodology, there were some pieces to this guide that were non-negotiable, right? Those are the way that we format a lot of our guides at the university. So having pages on books and databases to help orient users to our library's resources, a page on how to contact our chat librarian service, a page of related guides to kind of keep you in that same wheelhouse. I also have a page of resources and organizations that were compiled from both things that I knew of from my own professional experience, as well as those that I found through my own research. The organizations are organized by nationwide, statewide, and countywide level to kind of help localize it to where we are. And then from that template that I had kind of created, I reached out to some faculty in several of the different academic fields here: occupational therapy, school psychology, nursing. I reached out to a professional staff at the Office of Civic Engagement, and then I had my library colleagues as well look over it and provide me with some feedback. So just to kind of get moving on, we'll go through a few of the pages of the guide itself. So this is the first page of the guide. And this is just kind of a landing spot to kind of provides a little bit of background. They have these clickable tabs of definitions of IDD per a few different reputable organizations. These are coming from advocacy, education, and health sciences backgrounds. So AAIDD and the ARC are two really big advocacy organizations. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that is legislation relating specifically to the legal categorization of individuals with IDD and their qualifications for special education. And ICHD and the CDC are both health sciences organizations. And so this is just to kind of help really hit home that interdisciplinary view of how IDD is defined differently in a lot of different contexts, much like everything in existence. It is context dependent. What's actually right beneath this little module of the definitions is a little quiz that asks about inconsistencies in those definitions. It's just a yes or no. Do you notice any inconsistencies? And worry not about the grading, but it is actually, yes, there are inconsistencies. A lot of, and that specifically outlines the age of onset. So if you see on the AAIDD's definition, it says the age of 22. That is not necessarily what all of these definitions outline. Some of them say 18, some say 21. It really varies. I know that the age of 22 is specific to the United States because that is when individuals must have been diagnosed before in order to qualify for Social Security benefits and services under Social Security. But it varies depending on the context that we're in. And then the next page is the many facets of IDD. This is again to try and help illustrate the actual different areas of life that can be impacted. It's not a comprehensive list of ways that life can be impacted, but it's also, it's just to kind of help illustrate how things can be impacted. And I want to click this. Can you guys still see my internet browser?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this is actually an interactive image where you can click the individual orange buttons and learn about each of the actual pieces and these sections that are outlined and how they could individually be impacting ways of living. And sometimes I think this is also helpful because it might, life can be impacted in ways that we might not actually even think of. And I don't know how to make this full screen again. That's fine. Okay. All right. Oops. Okay. So then the next page is health conditions relating to IDD. And I have this for a couple of reasons. Again, to kind of hit home the concrete examples of IDD, as well as to kind of explain that this is not a monolith. So people's experiences with IDD is varying, and there are varying triggers and causes, be that a genetic disorder, be that traumatic brain injury, but their life experiences are not dictated by their actual diagnosis. It is impacted, but it's not dictated, and there's not one catch-all diagnosis that can cause this. And the impacts of a diagnosis can differ depending on an individual's situation. This was to just kind of help further illustrate the different ways that IDD can manifest. And it's also, we have a lot of students that are studying the health sciences at our school. So it's also helpful to kind of bring it back to that context for those students especially. And then this is the resources and organizations page that I had talked about earlier a little bit. Outlines some resources at the top of the page, and then several organizations as you scroll down, national, statewide, and county level. They're laid out in that format to kind of, again, help localize resources to the Allegheny County area. The resources, I think, can be useful not just for advocacy, but also for research. One that I thought particularly interesting was the Disability Voices, which is an oral history project. It is actually, it's vocal accounts from individuals with disabilities outlining their own experiences. And what I think can be really useful for that in research efforts is, especially in health sciences, not to bring it back to that, but especially in the health sciences, there's a lot of emphasis placed on the importance of patient narratives. And what better patient narrative than from the actual source of an individual? And that's fundamentally an individual's account is their own narrative. And so I think that that's a really useful resource and can be used in research and advocacy contexts. And then these are our books and databases pages that I've created, again, orienting users to library resources just to kind of help focus them if they are interested in pursuing research, ways that they can do that within our library. So just to kind of wrap up, I'd like to just, I hope that this guide, my hope with it is that showing the various contexts that IDD issues manifest will help a lot in holistic understanding of IDD. And I think that that can be facilitated with research strategies, orientation to library resources, and a connection to advocacy resources. Because I believe that a multifaceted understanding of IDD equips users to serve their communities in multiple contexts. And like I said, it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when, and we owe it to ourselves and to our communities to know better and be better with the individuals that we will go on to serve. So I'd like to open it up to questions. These are also my references, so I want to make sure that I'm citing them properly.
Oh, I have a question. So Joe, thank you. This is really looks like a very extensive guide and very useful. I'm just curious, and so this isn't related so much to the guide, but it does remind me that for the last, I want to say, couple of years, WVU has had a program, and it's tiny. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but they've had a program specifically for young college-age people with IDD to come to campus and, I believe, live in a dorm. But it's a very, very specialized program. So, you know, they don't go to regular university classes, which is not to say that we don't have all kinds of students in regular university classes with, you know, a diagnosed IDD. But so are you finding yourself doing anything specific in terms of library services or library instruction to work with, I don't know, you know, whether Duquesne has any kind of program like WVU's, but are you doing anything specific for the students that are in this population?
I don't know of anything right now that we were doing. That is a really good question. And I'm going to talk to some of my team to see if that's something that we could provide. I know of other schools that have done similar programs to the one that you're describing. And there were a couple of programs that I knew about when I was a caseworker that I would recommend to people who are interested in higher education. I'm not sure that we have any specialized program at Duquesne right now for that. But that's a really good point. Thank you.
I know the program here, I mean, it's obviously focused mostly on life, what we call life skills.
Right.
It's to help these young people have some more independence, move away from home and get that experience of being a little more on their own. So part of me thinks, you know, in terms of a library experience, maybe the public library would really be a more appropriate venue. But I don't know. it's one of those things that drifts through my head periodically, and I
Oh,
usually don't have
absolutely.
time to pursue it. So I was hoping.
Oh,
that makes
absolutely,
sense.
absolutely.
A
That's
great example.
definitely. That's definitely something that in caseworkers with as relating to IDD, it's very the framework that we go through is with fostering independence as much as we can. And so I definitely understand the hope of providing that in educational spheres as well.
Are there any other questions for Joe? That was fantastic, by the way. Does anyone else have a question? Going once, going twice. Okay, well, let's have a virtual round of applause for Joe as well. And yeah, I want to echo what Jessica says about good luck finishing your. Very exciting. Yeah, these were great library shorts, Ethan and Joe. Thank you so much for presenting to us and being with us, and thank you to all of our attendees as well. I guess I can stop recording now.